Hi, David Brennan here with the Sword of David. Did you know that in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus tells us where in the book of Revelation we can find the resurrection of the dead and the rapture? That's right. I'm going to show you how this takes place, and it's pretty straightforward. So remember this. The Olivet Discourse was launched by Jesus because the disciples asked him three questions. The last of those three questions was, tell us when the end of the age will be. The end of the age is the end of the church age. How do we know that? Here's some scriptures that prove that. Matthew 13, when we start looking around verse 37, Jesus starts talking about describing the wheat and the tares parable. And he says that the harvest is what? The end of the age. That's in verse 39. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angel. They will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and those who are righteous will shine. In other words, they go to heaven. It's the end of the age, the end of the church age. Daniel 12. He gives a version of this also. Verse 13 at the end of chapter 12. Now remember this, in Daniel chapter 12, the beginning of it is talking about the dead rising out of the dust of the earth. It's very much a resurrection of the dead chapter. At the end of the chapter, he says, but you, to Daniel, go your way till the end, the abbreviated version of the end of the age. For you shall rest and shall arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Of course, an age of time has days. He's simply using a different phrase to speak to the same event, the end of the age, the end of the days. Then we take a look at John 11, where Lazarus has died, and Martha's very upset, and they start talking about how, but you go your way. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Remember this, an age, the end of the age, an age of time has days. The last day is the end of the age. And Martha said, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day of the age. And Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. What you find is, there's a variation to the end of the age. End of days is used by Daniel. Martha and Jesus talk about the last day within the age of the church, that you have the resurrection of the dead and the rapture. So now, look at Jesus in the Olivet Discourse responding to the question. We're going to consider the last question that the disciples ask him, when is the end of the age? And he responds to it. He responds to it several times. Jesus answered, said to them, take heed, no one deceives you. A lot of deception at that time, which is what we have today. For many will come in my name saying, I'm Christ, and will deceive many. You'll hear of wars or rumors of wars. Don't be troubled, these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. That is a reference to the question using the abbreviation of the end of the age. The end is not yet. He's responding to their question. He goes on then, talking about how there'll be all these sorrows that will then take place. But now he gets more specific. He goes on in the Olivet Discourse and talks about how they would deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. You'll be hated by all men for my name's sake, and many will be offended, will betray one another, many false prophets, because the lawlessness will abound, the hearts will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. Again, a response to the question, when is the end of the age? Well, you have to make it to the end, the abbreviated version. Because why? At the end, or the end of the age, the end of the church age ends because the resurrection and rapture removes the church from the earth. Now he tells us where we're going to find the rapture in the book of Revelation. It's his final reference to the end. He says, excuse me. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then what will happen? The end will come. And then the end of the age will come. Three times he uses the abbreviated version of the end of the age, which is the end. And he answers the question, all right, this is when the end of the age is going to happen. Gospel's got to be preached to the whole earth. Well, guess what? Nowhere in Scripture are we told that man achieves preaching the gospel to the entire earth. Now, we certainly have the Great Commission. We need to go forth and preach it as much as we can to the earth, but you will not find in Scripture, from cover to cover in the Bible, where man succeeds in preaching the gospel to the entire world. But there is one place that this happens, and it's in the book of Revelation, chapter 14. You have in chapter 14, and he's going to lead us right to the resurrection of the dead and the rapture, which is the end of the age. Okay, remember he said the gospel gets preached to the whole earth, then the end comes. Now we're going to see the gospel getting preached to the entire earth in Revelation 14, and then a few verses later we're going to see the resurrection of the dead, the harvest, think Matthew 13, being taken. Jesus uses in Revelation 14 5 announcing angels to keep six events separate. Okay? It's that simple. This chapter 14 in the book of Revelation is nothing more than a broad overview of general events that are taking place during the second half of the 7-year tribulation. That's all it is. The events are kept separate by announcing angels. Well, listen to this one. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven. There's a second angel in this chapter, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying in a loud voice, fear God, give glory to him, and so forth. The gospel just got preached to the entire world, and nowhere else in Scripture does that happen. Well, guess what? Just a few verses later, Jesus is sitting on a cloud with a sickle, and we're told he's to take his harvest, and the harvest is reaped. That's the resurrection of the dead in the gospel. That's it in the book of Revelation. He's taking his harvest because the harvest is defined for us in Matthew 13 as the taking of the church, the harvest, the harvest of wheat. His children are resurrected and raptured at that time, because we know that according to Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4, that the dead rise first, then we are alive are caught up. Yeah, the resurrection and the rapture together. So Jesus just guided us to the resurrection of the dead and the rapture in the book of Revelation. Now note, it happens after the gospel just got preached to the entire world, which is exactly what he said. He laid it out in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, that seminal event will take place first, and then you will have the resurrection of the dead. Then, and only then, the end of the age, the end of the church age will take place. Now, some people try to blend together Jesus sitting on the cloud with his sickle to take his harvest with the next event that has a lot of blood and gore associated with it and a grapes of wrath reference. That event is the Battle of Armageddon because of the grapes of wrath reference. That's used elsewhere in Scripture when grapes of wrath are used. Joel chapter 3 is one good example, and elsewhere that's the Battle of Armageddon. They try to blend Jesus taking his church, the event before the Battle of Armageddon, with that battle, and they say, well, him sitting on the cloud to take his harvest can't be the rapture because there's so much blood and gore. Well, what they're missing is that there's a announcing angel separating the two events. So you can't blend, based on the structure of Revelation 14, you cannot blend the event of Jesus taking his church, the sickle, to take his harvest. Again, Matthew 13, the harvest is the church. The sickle to reap, the harvest was reaped. You can't blend it with the next event because it's separated by that announcing angel. So he makes it clear that sometime during the season of the second half of the 7-year tribulation, does the resurrection of the dead and the rapture take place, because his children will be witnessing, we will be witnesses to the world during that time, because the plagues can't touch us. And many will come to that harvest at the end, and we will be glorifying him, because this is not about our flesh, where we want to be out of here before it all starts. This is about the glory of the Lord in heaven. I hope this was helpful, and I'm sure there'll be some comments. God bless you. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments. God bless you.